Well, thank you for agreeing to do this, Dwayne. It's a long time since we've actually had just a quiet chat, so I'm quite looking forward to it.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So I'm here today with Dr. Dwayne Crombie, who was my first leader in health, if you remember, all those years ago, back in the day, and is now a client of CIO Studio. So welcome to the CIO Studio, which is our podcasting place today. Your resume never fails to impress me. Medical doctor, public health specialist, more letters after your name than I have in my name, I think. You were 15 years, I think, at Bupa as chief exec, both in New Zealand and then in Australia.
Yeah, now I'm a retired beach bum at Waiheke, mostly.
You and I worked together at Waitemata DHB. Feels like that was kind of a moment in time. Lots of people from that time have gone on to great things in health, haven't they? Rosalie Percival is up as CFO
of Health New Zealand to Whakaora, yeah.
Stuart Bloomfield when he was the interim CIO.
Yeah.
Robin Whittaker is chairing the Digital Council, so it's all the old gang, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And now you're taking it easy. You're just doing little things like board of Southern Cross, chair of Repromed, $3 million worth of investment in new properties.
Yeah. It's actually it's the right balance. Sadly, when you're a male, you realise you don't live quite as long as the other half, the woman's side. So I think the idea is to actually enjoy life and do a little bit of work, not the other way around.
Make the most of it.
I think so.
Yeah. And I guess that there are probably other things that you're doing that I don't know about. I kind of had a bit of a Google of you last night just to catch up, and it seemed that you're popping up in other places too. So have you got some other things that you're involved in?
The little chairing thing that I do for what's called an ENDIS provider, that's a very Australian term. So we provide complex wraparound in the community, based in Victoria, about 75 million a year, not-for-profit, very worthy. It was a kind of purpose-driven startup about 7 or 8 years ago. So I agreed to take the chairing role earlier this year. But really nice people and incredibly hard work, even harder than aged care, I think, at times.
So you're giving back a little? Yeah,
I mean, it's a modestly paid role, but I really enjoy what they're trying to do and just the, that kind of enthusiasm and kind of doing things for good kind of worthiness. There's nothing quite like it, being able to help people.
There's a lot of that in health, isn't there?
Yeah, and especially, disability and aged care, many of them are religious or not-for-profit NGOs. It relies a lot on some of those more community-based organisations.
So there's thousands of them out there, it seems. And
literally. Yeah. Obviously, you rely on families a lot in both aged care and disability care. You've seen a lot of corporatisation and some private equity in aged residential care, and more particularly in retirement village. And when I went into aged care, I think in 2006, my friends thought I'd gone into semi-retirement then. They said, that's a very genteel sector. But it kind of could do with a lot of the kind of systems thinking and processes and, developing people that, you would do automatically in, say, the public health system, but a lot of those other sectors didn't have status. They weren't places people necessarily raced to go and work in. And I think disability and mental health are always probably going to be like that. Just tough areas, really.
Yeah, we did a piece of research a few years ago now, trying to figure out what made NGOs tick. And one of the things that came out of that was that the good ones are very businesslike, even though they're not for profit, they're also not for loss. And so they have a really strong kind of operational discipline around them.
No, you have to. If you want to kind of do good, you actually need to be, you actually need to get things sorted out. And you need to run a small surplus. We debate what a small surplus is, but typically it's 3 to 4%. You need to have a little bit of a buffer. You need to invest in, technology, dare I say it, and other kinds of things. So if you want to do your job properly, even as a not-for-profit, then you kind of need to run things in a professional manner.
Well, thank you for raising technology, because that is helping to orchestrate that is our business. But you will have overseen many data and digital programs over the years, I imagine.
Yeah, when you're in the public sector, obviously we had a lot of interesting challenges with patient management systems and other kinds of support systems. So, as you know, we spend a lot of time working with Auckland and Counties Manukau and people like Orion Healthcare to try and get the kind of systems that would make patient care easier. I remember we actually had electronic discharges in the early 2000s from our house surgeons. That was a pretty radical idea. It's taken, actually looking at Australia, it's taken them 10 to 15 years to even kind of get up to some of those challenges in the public health system. So probably the biggest challenge for me was Bupa health insurance. I went across the Tasman in 2013 as a bit of a naive Kiwi who'd spent my entire working life in New Zealand, and I'd never held private health insurance, I might add, because when you're the CEO of Wairarapa District Health Board, it's probably not a good look to have private health insurance, I didn't think. They gave me the job. I hadn't worked in private health insurance. I hadn't had private health insurance, so obviously someone up there was kind of keen to take on something different. And just to get a scale of private health insurance in Australia, because you don't really have that sense here in New Zealand, but it's a much more mixed public-private system. So in those days, private health insurance was a $20 billion industry. It's a $30 billion industry today, of which about $6 billion comes from the Australian government in the form of tax rebates. So pretty big industry. I think 38 players. So going across to Bupa in 2013, I thought I was going to the big time. $7 billion revenue a year. Nearly, I think about 3.8 million customers. So quite a big B2C mainly business in Australia, very much targeting retail customers. So very similar to telcos, banks, other general insurers in terms of the kinds of challenges of trying to meet customer service, customer engagement, customer experience. And I'd have to say I was incredibly shocked by what I found there. It was like walking back in time. No CRM. It was kind of half a GUI interface on top of a 30-year-old COBOL-written legacy kind of technology platform that did claims processing and product management and stuff like that. No laptops for the staff. There was 100 retail stores across Australia. No laptops to go out into the community and do things. A kind of digital platform that was hopeless, not mobile enabled, certainly not in those days. And ironically, digital was under marketing, and they basically didn't do what the business wanted. The business would have a whole lot of wish lists, and then the digital team would do what they thought. So it was, fascinating to see a lot of disconnected technology, a lot of little silos. I remember the first month I was there, they have this magic thing every year of an annual price increase, where they put your health insurance up, and obviously a lot of people ring in to either try and argue or change cover or something like that. And I looked up at this clock in the room where all the customer contact people were, and it said 35. In fact, there were about 5 clocks and they all said 35. I said, well, what's that 35 mean up there? Oh, that's how long the next person who rings is going to have to wait. Wow. I was thinking, it's...
for a paid service, that's
for a paid service. And the only really good thing was all of our 37 competitors were equally as bad. That was, it was something about the complacency. Bupa made $350 million of profit back then. Everyone was making money, a complacent industry, a long way from a modern, agile digital technology.
No burning platform.
Exactly. In fact, that word came up in the first 6 months. Some of us who perhaps came from outside said, I think we've got a burning platform here. And 90% of the people who'd worked there, and many had worked there for many years, said, we don't have a burning platform. We're number 2 in the market, just behind number 1. We make a lot of money. What's the burning platform?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned that marketing was in charge of digital, which is not uncommon. So what did you do?
Well, there are many political battles you can take on. The first thing I had to do was actually get a management team, because my predecessor had left. 1 or 2 people had decided to move on. And we were in this strange position that the global CEO had just changed the entire structure, so that I ran a business unit with all the customer-facing and business support functions, but certain support functions like marketing and HR and finance were in a separate support thing. And in fact, the head of marketing for Australasia reported to the head of marketing for the globe. So they had that kind of matrix system. So you kind of had to negotiate with the support functions, even though you were effectively paying them out of your P&L and getting charged for them. You had to negotiate. So it took many years before marketing even came back under the business. And I won't bore you with that kind of power play inside a large corporate. But separately to anything I might have thought, the CIO, who was also in the same kind of support area, they were trying to get their hands on digital because they didn't think it should sit in marketing. So it went on and on for years and years and years. And in fact, was never structurally changed. The chief marketing officer became a chief customer officer in time. But what we actually sorted out was it was more important when we were doing improvement projects as to how we actually worked and how we agreed what was going to be done. So that, the kind of teams that drove that were business team, digital team, technology team, and it was done in lockstep as a troika on a lot of the key, and many of them were key digital projects. Not every project involved digital, but obviously quite a lot of them did. There was, obviously some that were just technology and business. But it was ways of working that ultimately made that whole process work a lot better.
So process improvement enabled by technology?
Oh, a huge amount of process improvement, but it was actually different people talking to each other about what problems were we trying to solve and what were the choices to solve them. And, but basically getting technology and digital to talk to each other, which, surprisingly they hadn't on many occasions. So you got disconnected improvement projects.
Yeah, it's because it's become, for a lot of people, digital transformation is actually about the customer experience and the outward facing, web and social and all of those kinds of things. And sometimes we forget that that's all enabled by the guys in the back room as well.
No, totally. And in fact, we went on a whole year's process to kind of figure out what it was that we needed to do. Customer experience, engagement journeys, what are we actually trying to do? How do we compete? Product flexibility, all those business things, this is what we want to do. To achieve that, we obviously need to sort out the technology architecture. A lot of what customers wanted for us was to be able to do the damn thing themselves. So a lot of that involved a digital solution they could use and mobile enabled and all the rest of it. And then there were the huge issues of process and complexity with legacy systems. Our products were written in legacy. You couldn't just change them easily. It took us about a year and a half from the time someone thought they might want to change products to work through what the business wanted to do, and then to work how you recoded the underlying COBOL system, and then you checked everything to make sure, because there were so many disconnections between different things. And the way our in-house COBOL was written, you could only really understand what was happening by actually running it through, like testing and testing and testing. There were no APIs in 2014. The world of connections where things kind of fitted together just wasn't there, basically. So monumental problem. And then at the end, you had this whole issue of culture and want to change, and kind of engaging people and getting people who were a bit more, they didn't need to be digital natives, but they actually needed to understand that, this is the way the world was going. Data analytics was rudimentary. It was SAS, which I think I learned SAS, statistical programs, in my 20s.
Yeah, software as a service now.
Yeah. And Excel, that was it. No real high-powered data analytics, rudimentary automation, no AI as you would know it today. So, there was a lot of just the whole, building up the capability and the kind of, you don't need business people to be experts, but you need for them to appreciate the power and, what some of these things can do.
Just listening to you talk about all the greatest hits of technology there, I'm thinking that you must have been leading by example to some extent.
Yeah, but it was hard. For me, I'd never been in that situation before. We did get advice. Obviously, we got business advice from both all of our people and one of the outside consultancies. Accenture were probably the most helpful in terms of just what was happening in technology and digital and the way the enablement of what your business outcomes were going to be. They kind of painted an ecosystem for how that should look and how things needed to be connected. At the time I was there, a lot of the pressure was, just do things, just like do things left, right and centre. And classically, you're changing the engine on a plane that's flying, and you're kind of worried if you do too much, the thing will fall out of the sky. And there is some tendency to just do this, do that, and do that, and then they're all disconnected, and you create more issues because nothing connects. And every time you change anything, you've got all sorts of nightmare trying to make sure it all fits still. So I think I put a lot of my personal energy into trying to get people to commit emotionally to it and to see the need for it and to talk to each other.
Yeah, it's often focusing on the change management as much as the technology.
Yeah, but in a corporate like that, a big corporate, people are very tribal. I don't think I'm telling you anything. I mean, most organisations are tribal. Humans love tribes. And getting people to work across the silos for common good is not as easy as it sounds.
Cool. So where did you end up after all of that effort?
Well, we had about a year where we had to convince the board to spend $250 million over 5 years, on top of probably spending 90 to 100 million as base spend. So that we kind of got that through, promising certain things. I think if I look back, we didn't get the customer growth that we were hoping for because the whole market suffered a loss of, what we call coverage or penetration. But we made a huge change to kind of the underlying way things worked. So we did actually end up having a proper CRM, Microsoft Dynamics, a thing that actually worked. We had, mobile-enabled digital platforms for customers that worked. We got a lot more flexibility in the product, which was written in Dynamics rather than the legacy system. I remember one conversation where it was about 2014, 2015 maybe, when we were just about to push the button and put the project up to the boards for approval. And I went and talked to a guy called David Curran. You may not know him. He was the CIO at Westpac Australia at the time. He'd spent 10 years at CBA before then. And CBA was seen as one of the success stories of digital transformation and transformation in general.
Because Ralph Norris led that, didn't he?
Yeah, but over the 4 or 5 years, they spent 1.5 billion Australian, and it was what they call a ground zero. They kind of like raised everything and started from the bottom. And I remember talking to him, thinking that's what he'd tell me to do. And he said, God, no, don't ever do what we did there. Crazy, and the only reason we got away with it is because we could throw a shitload of money at it and the board backed us, actually. He said, no, I'm at Westpac now, what we are doing. And he described a scenario that was pretty much similar to what we had at Bupa. So work on your customer CRM and the interface with the digital interaction with customers. He said, put all your energy into getting that bit right. And obviously you need to do certain technology architecture things along the way, but put your whole focus on that business facing bit and join things up. He said he wouldn't do, the big bang kind of approach.
It's interesting because there's a book just came out middle of last year called How Big Things Get Done, which makes exactly that point, is that thinking things through quite carefully is actually the secret to getting things right. And almost nothing ever turns out exactly as you plan it. So even if you get the result, you spend more money. Sometimes you don't get the full result, but you still need to make the change. So you have to think.
Yeah, well, if you look at the literature, it says about 70% of digital transformations do not materially deliver what was in the business case. And the average half-life of a digital transformation leader for the organisation is probably 15 months. It's a very stressful process, but it's probably better to just be a bit more focused on what you're trying to do and make sure whatever you do joins things up, whether it's data or the underlying way you store data or business, like try and build connections between things over time rather than, just throw the kitchen sink at stuff and have, 1,000 flowers in the desert, because ultimately that causes a lot of pain.
Yeah, we try to encourage our customers to think about the whole problem, not just pick a software product or a particular area of the business. So yes, that's good advice. So you've spent your entire career in health in one form or another. You must have a view about what's currently going on in New Zealand with the reforms.
Well, I won't be standing for politics anytime soon. Yeah, and I've said it to my friends. I think reorganising the health system, Health New Zealand, Whātua, away from the DHBs 2 to 3 years into a pandemic was craziness, like utter craziness. I'm not a centralist. I think that's the worst way to make decisions. And we went from a locally driven system with some central control from the Ministry and Health New Zealand to one that's paralysed, I think, really, by having a centralised structure. And the moment you have people in Wellington making all the decisions so close to the politicians, it's just the worst possible system.
Do you have any sense of, because that wasn't what the Simpson report recommended, was it? It was more of a regional focus that they recommended, I thought. Yeah,
and I mean, Simpson, I've met her a number of times, Heather. She is very much, I'd call her a structuralist or an anatomist. She believes structures matter. I'm kind of the opposite. I believe people, relationships, and what their purposes matters much more. Good people can make a shitty system work. If you have a stupid structure, it usually disables even the best people. Mm-hmm. But yes, you're right. There was a bit of politicking right at the end, and it wasn't one of her original solutions. And you've seen it with Polytex and the whole movement to have a single kind of Polytex structure. I've forgotten what the word we use for it. I've been in Australia too long where we call it TAFEs. But that whole kind of central thing where you lose a lot of local knowledge and kind of local decision making. It doesn't make sense. In New Zealand, it would have been better to have maybe 7 or 8 regional health boards. I think 20 was too many, clearly, for a population of 5 million, which is the same size as Melbourne. But I think 7 or 8, because you could have fitted that much more to the natural clinical and tertiary referral pathways and how the actual health system, or the hospital part of it, operates more sensibly. And, there are some things you could mandate nationally, like no more than 2 IT key systems in any area, so that you had a little bit of competition, but not...
Which is now the recommendation you might have seen?
Yeah, but like I could have told you that recommendation 20 years ago. If you have one, you're going to be, to be bluntly, you're going to be screwed because you've given someone too much power. And if you have 4 or 5, in Melbourne we have multiple, and it's just shambles.
Rosalie's done a good job of getting the Oracle system across the country finally. So that took, I think, 3 goes and about 10 years to materialise. But now that she's got the kind of centralised command and control for finance, that's actually gone quite well. Yeah. But a lot of the other problems that you outlined in Bupa, that's very much the order of the day.
Yeah, but I think with 7 or 8 organisations and the minister and those chairs and boards, making sure they were aligned in thinking, you could have driven commonality on a small number of things where you needed it, and typically that would be technology, procurement systems, HR support. There's some things where you do want commonality. You don't want too many choices, but where it comes to clinically led services or primary care or community involvement and community development, why would you ever want that run by a system that's headquartered in Wellington? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, economies of scale are a great idea, and we had this challenge back in the Health Alliance days, which that grew to be the largest IT shop in the country for a while, until Te Whātua was established, which then became the largest IT shop. So, but it's a lot harder to make it work, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. You make a shop like that, and then you've got to make sure it's, responsive to the internal customers. And that's the same with any corporate, really. How do you make these services which support one or more organisations, how do you make them responsive to the needs of the organisation? It's how hard it was to convince people to give up their control to a 4th entity which was jointly owned even. People hate that loss of power and control.
Yeah, and for good reason sometimes, if you don't get the service.
Yeah, totally. And I suppose, how do you create that discipline? Anyway, so I'm not a fan of the current system, but I think Shane Reddy, he's got an impossible position because it can't go through any restructuring. So he will have to create within a national organisation a more decentralised approach that's regional and try and replace some of that lost experience and knowledge at a regional level and allow enough delegation and autonomy for people to kind of solve problems locally, really.
Yeah, we're doing some work in primary care now, which is I think probably the next level of reform. What do you think is likely to play out there with PHOs and the like?
Yeah, well, when they were originally given capitation funding, obviously there was hundreds of millions put into it, and they were in a pretty good place. It seems pretty tough at the moment. You read stories of, clinics, especially after hours clinics, closing down. I think there's one up at Wellsford, there's some in the Bay of Plenty, there's some elsewhere. So clearly some parts of the primary care system are under stress, a real difficulty getting general practitioners, particularly in non-urban settings. And I think it's not as bad as Australia. In Australia, the system favours specialists. They get a lot more money, to put it bluntly, out of the Medicare payments than GPs do. So, in fact, if it's possible to believe, I think general practice in Australia is even worse. But, ultimately, you're going to have to figure out how do you encourage medical graduates and other non-medical people into that career. And, money's going to have to be one of the solutions. And then how do you support them in some of those roles? Because if you look at all of the evidence we have globally, if you don't have a strong primary and community care system, so much blows back into hospital care, and it's a more expensive way of doing things, much more expensive way of doing things.
And the evidence, I think, is pretty strong that having good primary care is better for the individual as well, right?
Yeah, totally, especially if you've got a preventative element where you can encourage them you do some healthier behaviours, amongst them and their family and support group. Hospitals are great, but if you're trying to see everything in an ED or a hospital, it's just such an expensive way to deal with things.
So Repromed is an interesting business, kind of a specialist business, but sort of in primary care as well. How did you get involved in that? A very much smaller entity than some of the ones we've been talking about.
I'd left Waitemata for about a year, and I was working actually for private equity at that point. Bupa hadn't bought us off a private equity company quite yet, and some IVF gynecologists approached me who I knew from my days in North Health and Waitemata. In fact, I'm surprised they approached me because I spent most of my time taking the services out of Central Auckland, which they were a part of, and giving them to Waitakere in the North Shore, actually. So I'd have thought they'd be lucky to speak to me. But they said, we've only got one private infertility service in the whole of the country, which was set up by Richard Fisher and Freddie Graham, ex-National Women's. And, we think customers deserve a choice. And some Australians, Repromed Adelaide, interested in doing a JV. So that was, I think, 2007. So we kind of set up a startup company, 50% owned by Repromed and the rest owned by the gynecologists. And that went for about 4 years and didn't make any money. So hard, no public contract, fledgling startup. And the Aussies said, we've got better things to do with our time. So they left, and we had a decision, and we just said, we're going to make a go of it. So we established Repromed Auckland and now New Zealand. So I've been with those IVF gynecologists and people really for a long, long time now. It's like a family-owned business. It's only owned by us collectively. There's no private equity or outside business ownership. About 35 people. There's about 8 specialists. But it's just a really neat service. You're kind of brought to ground by individual customer feedback, by checking your overdraft or your bank balance.
So how does that translate for you after such a long time in massive organisations?
Refreshing, I would say. Seriously refreshing because you're much more in touch with what's happening, and it's much more. So I love. I loved my corporate challenges, but I kind of love this. Everyone pretty much knows everyone. COVID's been the best thing for our business, unbelievably, really. It's turbocharged our business.
How so?
Well, people seem to be thinking about more babies. I mean, obviously thinking about legacy. Obviously, a lot of younger women with freezing their embryos can't find Mr. or Mrs. Right yet. So, it's whatever's happened, COVID's forced a lot of reflection about what's important in life. And it's not just pets, bicycles, and lots of digital equipment. It's obviously kind of gone to a much more fundamental level. So it's
interesting.
And I mean, one of the problems is that, because of the economic pressure on everyone, people are delaying taking, child bearing choices. And as we know, as you get older every year, and I think your fertility as a woman just about falls off a cliff from the age of 37, 38. So a lot more people, can't conceive naturally, need some help. And that's just a demographic of what's happening with the population. So that's obviously kind of part of it. So it's a wonderful business, and obviously not everyone gets a happy bouncing baby, but it's a surprisingly effective, successful thing. People usually do multiple cycles if they don't get a baby on the first one. So it's kind of really positive.
I was impressed with how that's always the goal, no matter how well it goes or otherwise.
It's the ultimate outcome goal well, there's two, just how many fertilized embryos and then a successful live birth. I mean, it's a very simple outcome.
Yes, we've made great mileage socially by using some of the terms that we've heard, like sperm washing. I can't remember the other one that Angela mentioned.
Yeah, well, sadly, the male, as you've probably seen, with all the research about male sperm counts dropping over the last century, it's a bit depressing, actually. In a couple of 100 years, they might have to do without us.
That'll be technology. So in business terms, I mean, you've encountered some of the same sorts of challenges, haven't you, in terms of complexity and process improvement and so on. When I was running a smaller business, I found that a lot of my kind of big corporate skills really didn't work so well because they were kind of much more long term, much more big scope. Did you find that as well?
Yes and no. I suppose what certainly drove my experience at Bupa was this need to improve customer experience and customer engagement. I haven't talked about it, but it's a very competitive industry, and retention is critical. So that a lot of analytics goes into which customers stay and why some move. And we had an NPS robot that scored every phone call with our contact center staff. So the customer we sampled, and we got their scores some of the time. Our robot scored both the employee sentiment for the call and the robot and the customer sentiment. And average-wise, it was remarkably accurate. And we could actually pair up certain contact center agents with the same customer if it was a positive experience, and keep them apart if it wasn't last time they talked. So when you're down in an organisation like Repromed, word of mouth in a place like Auckland is so critical to have what people think of you. There's only two competitors. Oh, the third one's obviously the public sector at what used to be ADHB, Vert Plus. So, that customer thing is really strong at that level. The price and value equation, because people are paying a lot of money, that's really much clearer than in a big corporate, because in a big corporate the money falls out of the sky usually, isn't it?
One way or another.
I suppose the other corporate skill I used was just how people collaborate and work together, and that's even more important in a small organisation. And given the shareholders are all me, the lab manager, and the IVF specialist, it's pretty important we all are open with each other and are going on the same wavelength in terms of how the business is running and stuff like that. So some skills are important. Dealing with all the political shit that you have in a corporate, no, you don't miss that.
So in terms of the motivation to go into a change, what drove that? Was it the desire to grow, or was it to save money, fix problems? What was the motivation?
Are you talking about Bupa or Repromed?
Repromed. Yeah.
Basically, we'd just grown too successfully. We'd been in that place in Remuera Road since 2007. It was fine, but we're a victim of our own success, and the staff are just about... We've had to take space across the road. We're climbing up the wall. We essentially, it's dealing with our current growth and likely future growth. We just needed to have a bit more room and space. So very simple.
So, do you think that you're unusual at the kind of level that you operate at, in that you have such a deep understanding of the benefits and the characteristics of digital technology and how to manage it?
It's hard for me to say. I mean, it was quite novel in 2013, 2014, this stuff. I would say, I mean, remember I've worked in Australia for 10 years. I would say pre-COVID, say 2019, pretty much any senior executive, certainly in Australia in any service industry, 80, 90% of them understood it wasn't about whether, because digital transformation is effectively a lifelong process. We're in a world where customers are always on, well, many customers are always on, and your competitors, you can expect them to be champion at the bit and stuff like that. So I think the issue is more about just how you're going to, get your whole organisation to understand and what your particular focus and priorities will be for your organisation.
So what are some of the nature of the conversations that go on in boardrooms around this stuff when the tech guys aren't in the room? What do they say about this?
Well, most boards are kind of sceptical, because, they're a bit like, what do I call them, the research analysts for the listed companies. They've heard all the management patter before, and the big consultancy patter and stuff like that. They're kind of interested, do you really know what you're planning to do? And, how much certainty or guarantee do they have you'll actually deliver a majority of the things you're promising in the business case? I think most boards get it. There's not a debate about whether.
It's just about the implementation.
Yes, exactly. Can you execute on this? What are the risks of certain things, and how are you managing?
So those risks are pretty well understood at the leadership level.
Yeah, but they are. But different boards are more or less risk averse. I mean, the Bupa board is traditionally very risk averse, and so we spent 200 million on cyber in 2.5 years, on top of all the other spends we were doing, which is, I mean, it's a pretty, and that was mandated effectively globally. So you can see that, that set off an interesting conversation with obviously me and our teams. We thought of all the good we could do with, maybe 100 of that 200 million, but people are effectively putting up a huge insurance premium for the brand, and, you can debate that one. We didn't get a chance to debate it. It was mandated, as I said. But those are the kinds of things a board can be more or less risk averse. From what it sounded like, the CBA board were amazingly willing to take risks. When you think about what they did, amazing. So, a lot of this then comes back to a board's kind of risk-reward equation, some of those debates.
I remember we wrote a paper quite a few years ago now where there was a quote which actually came from Stephen McKernan when he was CEO of Hutt Valley. He said IT has been the graveyard of many a chief executive, which I thought was a lovely turn of phrase. But times have moved on since then.
Yeah, but partly, I mean, some of the work I saw was, if you packaged what you were trying to do on a technology digital front, and were clear about what each of those packages were and the value uplifts and how it connected to whatever the vision of the future would be, you had more chance. But the kind of the bigger the package, and often a bit of ambiguity inside that big package, then your risks of not delivering kind of went up quite dramatically, essentially. So I think bite size, but the bites have all you've got to know how the bites fit together over a period of time.
So what is the kind of response to some of the current buzzwords like interoperability? You mentioned APIs, agile, artificial intelligence now. What are some of the reactions to those things? Is it seen as being kind of jargon sales pitch?
No, not at all. Not at all. But people want the specifics. I mean, people, data analytics, and there's so many levels of AI. And I'm obviously on a number of boards. I mean, the questions are, well, so what do you mean? So what's currently happening? What do you want to do? How will that actually achieve our business outcomes? And a lot of businesses, have some way to go. So, it should be relatively straightforward in terms of improvement in business or customer interaction. but it's grounded in how do those things actually give us some business advantage. I think those are all the conversations. People don't react to jargon at all now. It's just all around us, this stuff. But people are desperately trying to be clear about what it is you're wanting to do, and whether you're going to succeed basically in that task. And when you're in insurance or any bank, telco, a lot of the challenge to you is keeping good customers. So you can imagine data analytics and AI can help you a lot. I mean, when we were doing our digital funnel, just having better data analytics around who actually managed to get out the funnel and buy something online versus why they stopped higher up, and what were the characteristics, what was likely to be stopping them achieving what their mission is. Could we automate or make easier that pathway for people? There's a lot of things you can do once you have some data. These are potential customers, not real customers, but you can see with real customers trying to keep good customers. We used to have a program that would ring customers that hadn't claimed for 18 to 24 months and encourage them to go and get their teeth checked from a hygienist. It was better for us for them to claim something and not leave us than for them not to claim and think health insurance was a waste of money or that they weren't getting a good deal from us. So there's lots of ways at a business level you can use data or AI.
And presumably better for their health as well.
Totally.
Not doing things they should be doing.
Yeah, we had another program which is about real time, where in this system in Australia, for things like dental and eye checkups and physio, you can use your Bupa card. It's industry wide, and it would zip zap. And if you had a really good policy, you wouldn't have a co-payment, and if you didn't, you might have to top up. But if your card didn't work, we kind of spent ages trying to produce a program that would tell you within 10 seconds why your card hadn't worked and what you could do about it. Either it wasn't in the policy you had, or your payment hadn't gone through last month. There was lots of ways you could. It would tell you what it was, and it would try and give you either a link or a phone call to try and resolve the situation. Because our research showed us that's the most embarrassing moment for a customer.
Of course, yeah.
You go to the dentist, you put your card through, it doesn't work. I mean, it's like your credit card doesn't work in the restaurant, isn't it? It's not a good look. So you don't want to have your customers shamed, because you can guarantee the chances of them leaving are really, really high. Yeah.
So you're using things like analytics to really decide how you're going to respond and make the business more efficient.
Yeah, and things like PEGA, personalization in real time, it took a lot of technology to be able to interact. But that's the same technology CBA and some of the banks are using in real time with their text alerts and stuff.
So in all of that, do you still see the value and the importance of this, what we call the CIO role, the Chief Information Officer or Chief Innovation Officer, depending on what term you'd like to use?
Obviously the rise of the Chief Digital Officers kind of happened in corporates, and you've kind of got both, but in a short word, absolutely. I just think the skills of the CIO, as they were traditionally, will change. Like, the chief marketing person these days can't be just a traditional marketer. They need to be much more new world skills. So I think every executive, CEO, CMO, CIO, CT, all of them have actually got to understand the business context in which they operate, the connections to other parts of the corporate entity. They've just got to be a lot more rounded and a lot better at communicating and collaborating.
No silos.
Well, they've got to be able to bridge the silos with connections. Yeah, it's hard to change the silos, but you can change the way silos work together. So yeah, a much more rounded. You can't be just the tech nerd that grunts in the
yes, with the sweaty t-shirt, as Bill English famously said.
Even CIOs need some EQ.
Indeed, yes. So, do you think there's a particular place where leadership of digital should sit in an organisation, or should it sit across all functions?
Well, ultimately, if you're in a service company in this environment, almost every senior executive needs to have an appreciation and a good understanding of digital and technology. You just can't get away from it. But I think it's become so complex. If the bigger you are, you're always going to have a CIO, chief digital officer. You're going to have someone who's head of cyber. You're going to have, it's beyond one person's realm in some of the bigger corporates that exist, and there's just so much happening.
Yes, of course. Yeah, certainly in the case with Health New Zealand, at the moment they have many roles that would be at least at that level across all the different areas.
Yeah, well, it'll be obviously, as someone who may end up using the public health system, I hope they kind of get it right, really.
Yeah, well, it remains to be seen, doesn't it? But I do think that things tend to improve over time even if we don't do anything. So,
especially if we don't restructure anymore, people develop relationships and connections and ways of working. And if you've got good people, I'd back them every day of the week to kind of nut out things that will take us forward, really. It just, it makes me despair that politicians think structure doesn't solve problems, does it? Not at all. Not at all. It doesn't help at all, really. In fact, it causes a lot of damage often.
Yes, and there's been a lot of it in the sector over the years. So, what, as a chair or a leader, what really worries you with all of this stuff, if anything?
Technology and digital transformation.
Yeah.
At a specific level, it doesn't worry me. They're all things to be done. I think like anybody that reads these days, I do worry about AI. Stephen Hawking said if we don't get off this planet in the next 100 years, AI will kill us as a species. So you kind of it's a really tricky one. I've just finished a book on gene editing, a book on Professor Dudner, who got a Nobel in 2020 for figuring out how bacteria fought off viruses using a special gene editing technique. And that's basically the basis for a lot of the gene editing now. It's amazing that we've managed to figure out something that took the bacteria 1 billion years to figure out. But it's the same kind of thing. You had, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, a Chinese doctor who basically produced gene-edited babies. And that's been a bit of a line that everyone's agreed we shouldn't cross once you start gene editing real humans. Not for a disease, but their entire somatic chromosome. That's a pretty big thing without the kind of ethical debate about what's okay. And I suppose it's the same with AI, and we had it with, I've forgotten his name now, when he got the sack and got reinstated, just someone who, to a complete, non-tech member of the public, looked like he was ready to cross any line without any kind of control. That worries me. I loved Terminator. I don't want to be part of it coming to life.
It's funny you should mention that, because I saw a post just the other day which said the most unbelievable part of Terminator was the business leader working on an AI who decided to destroy his work.
Yeah, you're right, actually, isn't it? Yeah, people create a baby. They're not going to destroy their baby.
That's right. Even if it's going to destroy the world.
Totally, yeah. No, I think that should worry us all, really, and I don't think there's any easy answer, sadly.
No, indeed. Yeah. So what do you think the future holds? What do you think, where we think we'll be in 10 years?
We, New Zealand, or...
Yeah, with our lovely little corner of the world, with all of our small businesses and good relationships.
Well, it is a fabulously friendly country. And, when you've spent 10 years away living in Melbourne like I do, I love Melbourne to bits. It's got all the culture and scale of a modern global city. But there's something really nice about New Zealanders and to New Zealand. I think we've got to figure out a way not to lose that. I do worry, and I think it's Winston Churchill who said, if you're not an idealist when you're 20, and I certainly was an idealist, but if you're not a conservative by the time you're 50, you've got no brain. But we have this, and I've seen it with the last Labour government, 35% increase in public servants, and this is a highly political statement, in mostly Wellington, is not going to help our country at all. We have to figure out how to be able to live in a global world by selling services and being open for business and allowing communities to have support at a local level. The answer is not a lot of bureaucrats and bureaucracy and red tape in Wellington. It's just out of control, really, I think. And people just have this abiding faith that it's the way to solve our problems. Well, it certainly isn't. So,
I think the full quote is, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you've got no heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're older, you've got no sense.
Totally. But you know, like a lot of that sense, I trust people at a local or regional level to kind of be able to have a better chance of debating that. I just think it's like any organisation, the further you are from the customer or the person who's paying, the harder it is for you to really feel and know what's going on. And it's harder for you to get what should be done right. So that's, you know, a big challenge for most CEOs. People don't tell you the truth, get too far from the customer. Same with politicians. You know.
There are not too many people that are willing to speak truth to power.
Well, a lot less these days in Australia and New Zealand because you basically get sacked. I mean, Australia's even more brutal. You say what you think and you're out the door, basically. I mean, it's even crazier in America. Don't get me started. I'm looking forward to November with a presidential election, the end of the American democracy dream.
Sure, I'll be buying popcorn for that one.
Yeah. So really positive, but you know, we've got to be able to enable people to solve some of these things rather than kind of think the nanny state's going to help them.
Yeah. Yes, it's a balancing act, isn't it? Because we like the services that government provides, but we want them to be delivered efficiently as well.
True, but you know, I think only 45% of the country pay tax. You've got to kind of get that balance right too. Really, somehow we've got to be able to, you know, afford whatever life we want. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I remember I read somewhere that Kiwis love. We have a taste for public services on the Scandinavian model, but not the same taste for their tax model.
No, well, even the Scandinavians are struggling, really. We've seen a lot of stuff happening, particularly in Sweden, which is,
Yes, worldwide problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Final point. Do you think that going overseas for digital solutions in all the transformations that are going to need to happen over the next few years is the right answer? Should we be looking to import overseas solutions, or should we figure out our own?
It's a hard one. I think if you're a bigger organisation, these days you tend to get driven by an Australasian solution anyway. If you're a wholly New Zealand-owned solution, it comes back to your size, I suspect. I mean, for many things, if you're of a good size, it probably makes sense to take a solution that's seen to be effective in your industry, rather than completely customising something from the bottom. I think I'd be less worried about the systems. I'd be more worried about having people going through our school and tertiary system that have the skills, really. I don't think we produce enough people in that area, the whole science and technology thing. I think we need more people with those kinds of skills to be in the workforce, and even if we lose some overseas, I think that will be much better for our future.
Yeah, that's the whole STEM argument, isn't it? That far too many people going into
non-productive things like law.
Yes, we won't mention medicine.
They haven't replaced us with robots yet.
No, and I'm sure we never will. It's far too much human need there. Well, it's been a great chat. We've gone on for a bit. We've probably got more important things to do with your time. So look, I really appreciate you coming in and giving us all your insights. It's been fascinating to listen, actually.
No, it's lovely to catch up with you, and it's been great working with you. It's even made Retromed much stronger than we were about 2 years ago, so we're delighted.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah.